And welcome once again to Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. Joining me as he always does is Juan Zarate. He's our national security analyst. Juan, good to see you.
Bob, great to see you.
The fallout from the Bergdahl deal. Let's just review. He's still in Landstuhl getting treatment. He hasn't yet come back to the country. Meanwhile, the 5 Taliban prisoners are now somewhere in Qatar. What's going on here?
Well, you have major policy debates emerging from sort of the rollout of this swap and this deal. And part of this has to do with the question of, was it worth it, right? So you get the questions of what was Sergeant Bergdahl doing and how dangerous are these 5? Frankly, I think we should leave Sergeant Bergdahl out of this. We need to let him recover, get him back to his family, leave him out of this. But the reality is it's emerged a policy debate. Have we legitimated the Taliban inadvertently? Have we put 5 of the senior most Taliban members back into the fight? Even though we're not going to have troops in Afghanistan in a couple of years, the Taliban is still going to be fighting. And so have we thrown into the mix some of those senior leaders, leaders that Mullah Omar has now praised and is pleased are back in the fight? Third, what's the role of Qatar in this? Did they provide any money, for example, to the Taliban or the Haqqani network as part of this? Are they going to be able to constrain the Taliban? What role is Qatar playing with extremists around the world? And finally, what have we done in terms of our policy? Have we put a higher price on the heads of Americans, not just servicemen and women, but also civilians around the world, given that we're demonstrating that we're willing to deal in some way for the return of American citizens?
Let's try to answer a couple of those questions.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, the Taliban. Have we legitimized the Taliban? Have we made them essentially a diplomatic entity that we have to deal with? And do we deal with them as a country, or do we deal with the Afghan government?
Well, one of the hopes all along, over the last few years is that there would be a political dialogue. There would be reconciliation with the Taliban. And frankly, the return of the 5 senior members was always seen as part of a broader deal to jumpstart the reconciliation process. That wasn't really what was at play here, although there is some hope that in dealing with the Taliban, maybe you've opened up a dialogue in some way. The problem, though, Bob, and you and I have talked about this, is the Afghan government had nothing to do with this. They weren't a part of these discussions. In fact, they're quite upset about this. And at the end of the day, the Afghan government has to be a part of any reconciliation with the Taliban. They're the ones running the government. They're the ones who are going to have to live with the Taliban. And in this regard, in some ways, we've legitimated the Taliban by dealing with them bilaterally and not including the Afghan government.
What do we do going forward? Does it have to be a 3-way deal? Do we always have to have the Afghans and the Taliban at the table with any kind of ongoing foreign policy issue we have?
Well, I mean, at this point, we've postured ourselves as no longer really having, a role to play in terms of combat, after 2 years. So it's really a question of, do we play a classic diplomatic political role of sort of middleman? And I'm not sure about that, Bob, because I think the question is, can the Afghan government and the Taliban forces come to some agreement and a modus vivendi? I don't know. But that's going to be for them to resolve. And the posture of the United States, especially if we're not going to have forces in there past the Obama administration, what is our role to reconcile the Taliban? Maybe no role at all. So it's an interesting question.
The largest question you raised goes around the policy point here. The administration is not backing down. Defense Secretary Hagel essentially doubled down, saying we had to do this. This was our last best chance to do this. Yet there's still withering criticism. The poll is overwhelmingly negative. What do they do?
Well, I think they have to stick by their guns. I mean, they made a hard decision. They've got to live with it. I think the problem was in how they've explained it and how they defended it. Because as we've said, look, this is a hard decision. You want to get your American soldier back, but you've got to realize that there are real costs, risks, and consequences to this, and you've got to own up to that as well. You can't just celebrate the return and not own up to the problems that it raises. One of the key policy questions, and this is longer term, and I haven't seen much discussion about this, Bob, is are we taking steps from a policy perspective, like the return of the 5, as a way of animating and driving this narrative of being at the end of the war? That is to say, is the Obama administration making policy decisions, some of them very hard, that in essence feed the narrative and feed our posture of having ended the wars, whether it's in Iraq or Afghanistan? And do those decisions, perhaps, for example, like emptying out Guantanamo, do those present risks well beyond the 2+ years that the Obama administration has in power? And is the president posturing ourselves actually to be in a worse position 2 years from now when we're facing this diversity of threats, be it in Afghanistan with the Taliban, with the Al-Qaeda members in Iraq that are now taking over territory, or other threats that we've now admitted are metastasized and festering around the world. Are we posturing ourselves in the right way? And I think that's a really important policy debate moving forward. And I think this Bergdahl situation has illuminated to a certain extent the willingness of the administration to take heat in order to drive the narrative of having ended the war.
Well, that's an issue that will go on into the election in 2016, and someone else will have to confront that.
That's right.
Juan, thanks very much.
Thank you, Bob.
And thanks to you for watching Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. We'll see you next time.